Hey there, sleepyheads, and welcome back to our quiet corner of history where the past unfolds gently, inviting your mind to drift and wander. Tonight, we're stepping behind the Iron Curtain, not into the grand narratives of political leaders or Cold War tensions, but into the incredibly personal, often uncomfortable, and surprisingly resilient daily lives of ordinary people across the Soviet Union. If this calm exploration of history's more intimate corners resonates with you, a quiet subscribe and a thoughtful like are always appreciated. And we always appreciate a brief note in the comments sharing where you're listening from, perhaps a quiet thought before sleep. So dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as the tangible realities of Soviet existence begin to coalesce around you. You awaken not to the gentle hum of a modern heating system, but to the palpable biting chill that permeates your small room in a Leningrad Kommunalka circa the 1950s. Your breath, a fleeting cloud in the frigid air, is a stark visual testament to the inconsistent central heating. A daily reminder that warmth is a luxury, not a given. You pull the thin blanket higher, drawing it almost to your chin, but it's little more than a suggestion of comfort against the pervasive cold. Often you've supplemented it with the rough wool of your coat, or perhaps a worn shawl, but even then, a persistent sense of physical discomfort, a subtle ache in your joints greets you with the dawn. It's a familiar sensation, one that teaches you early the value of movement, of rising quickly, if only to outrun the chill that seems to seep into your very bones. You've grown accustomed to the way the air nips at your exposed skin, the subtle shiver that runs through you as you contemplate the day ahead, a quiet meditation on resilience. Beyond the thin, uninsulated door of your cramped room, the symphony of communal living has already begun. The clatter of pots and pans from the shared kitchen downstairs, punctuated by the sharp, hushed arguments over something as fundamental as a small portion of sugar or the use of a burner, are part of the daily soundscape. You hear the torturous groaning of ancient pipes, as someone, perhaps a neighbour named Galina or old Mikhail from down the hall, flushes the toilet. Then a distant thin cry of a baby, muffled but distinct, weaves through the pre-dawn stillness, a testament to the myriad lives, dreams and struggles coexisting within these walls. Every sound, every echo seeps through the thin partitions, invading what little sense of privacy you might hope to cling to. It's a constant auditory reminder that you're never truly alone, never fully detached from the interwoven lives around you. Your private space, a mere 150 square feet, serves as a bedroom, dining area and storage for your entire family. The very concept of personal privacy, you learn, is considered a quaint bourgeois affectation, as if needing to use the toilet without an audience were a revolutionary act. Here within these walls, your life is an open book, if only to those within your immediate family. Your narrow beds, functional and sturdy, double as couches during the day, their lumpy mattresses disguised by simple throws. Hooks along the wall hold your family's clothes, a visual narration of necessity over aesthetics, as every inch of space is too precious for closets or cumbersome dressers. The sight of everyone's clothing, openly displayed a patchwork of worn fabrics and utilitarian designs, is a common domestic tableau. A constant visual cue of shared space and limited resources. It tells a story of survival, of making do, of an unspoken understanding that personal style is a luxury far down the list of priorities. And as you finally pull yourself from the cold embrace of your bed, you know the long, dim corridor awaits, worn smooth by decades of countless footsteps. The long, dim corridors of these old pre-revolutionary apartments are a character unto themselves, a liminal space bridging private struggles and public performance. As you step out of your room, the single yellow bulb, often flickering or casting more shadow than light, does little to dispel the gloom. Your footsteps, softened by decades of countless others, echo slightly on the worn parquet flooring, smoothed into a subtle sheen by the relentless friction of daily life. The wallpaper peeling in places reveals layers of past eras, each tier and faded pattern a silent testament to the apartment's enduring history, a visual metaphor for neglect and constant use. It's a space that feels suspended in time, carrying the whispers of generations past their routines, their small joys, their profound anxieties, all absorbed into its very fabric. You move with a practiced quietness, a learned courtesy born of necessity, mindful of others still sleeping, or perhaps already up and grumbling about the chill or the queue for the shared bathroom. This communal living, while challenging, also fostered a unique kind of resilience and an intricate web of unwritten rules. You learn quickly that eye contact in the corridor is brief. A quick nod, perhaps a murmured dobro utro, if the mood strikes, but nothing more. Long conversations are reserved for the kitchen, where the clatter of breakfast preparations can mask more intimate discussions, or for the quiet hours after the shared meal when the air is thick with the scent of cabbage and strong tea. Your sense of personal space, so diminished in a physical sense, becomes an internal fortress, a mental retreat. You learn to filter out the noise to exist within the constant proximity of others without truly letting them in, a necessary skill for maintaining sanity in such close quarters. The sounds, once an assault, become a background hum, a familiar rhythm to your days. Yet there are moments, small, fleeting instances, when the collective spirit, the very thing that often grates on your nerves, asserts itself in a positive way. A neighbour sharing a rare find from the market, a piece of news passed along that could save you a precious hour in a queue, or a moment of shared laughter over a particularly absurd bureaucratic directive. These small acts of solidarity are like tiny sparks in the dim corridor, reminding you that even within the constraints of the Kommunalka, a fragile human connection persists. You understand that your struggles are their struggles, and theirs yours. The pervasive cold, the chronic resource limitations, the constant negotiation of shared space, these are not merely personal burdens, but collective experiences that bind you to those around you, creating an unspoken pact of mutual understanding. As the 1960s dawn, the whispers of change begin to reach even your corner of Leningrad. There's talk of new housing of private apartments, a concept so foreign, so impossibly luxurious that it feels like a dream. The promises of progress, once abstract ideological pronouncements, begin to take on a tangible form, distant but growing nearer. You've heard the rumours, seen the newspaper articles, but after years of communal struggle, after waking to the chill and the cacophony, after navigating the endless corridors, it's hard to truly believe. The idea of your own entrance, your own bathroom, your own kitchen, it borders on the unimaginable. You mentally tally the number of years you've spent in the Kommunalka, the countless mornings of shivering, the endless negotiations over shared resources. The thought of escaping this intricate, suffocating dance is both exhilarating and terrifying, a monumental leap into an uncertain yet potentially far more dignified future. Then almost imperceptibly at first, that unimaginable future arrives. You find yourself standing perhaps a decade later in the bustling, ever-expanding Moscow of the 1960s before a new Khrushchevka building. This isn't just a building. It represents a profound, almost unimaginable luxury. After years, perhaps a decade or more, of navigating the intricate social and physical landscape of communal living, you now have your own private one-bedroom apartment. This isn't just a roof over your head. It's a monument to personal dignity, a small slice of promised progress finally materialized. You possess your own entrance, a bathroom that requires no frantic strategic timing, and a kitchen that is solely yours, free from the clatter of neighbours' pots or hushed arguments over sugar. It's a sanctuary, a quiet retreat from the constant surveillance and shared intimacies of the Kommunalka, a personal revolution. These Khrushchevka blocks, however, are far from aesthetically pleasing. From the outside, they're often described with that particular Soviet blend of weariness and wit as giant filing cabinets for humans, a practical assessment if a little lacking in curb appeal. Mass-produced, cheaply constructed with thin walls and featuring incredibly tiny kitchens, they are the epitome of utilitarian design. Yet within these standardized, often drab spaces, residents immediately begin to inject a sense of home, a desperate yearning for individuality. You might spot a struggling plant on a small balcony, its green leaves reaching hopefully towards the perpetually grey Moscow sky, a small act of defiance against the uniformity. Inside the walls might be painted a slightly different shade. A cherished family photograph might adorn a shelf, or a hand-embroidered tablecloth might cover the diminutive kitchen table. These are not grand statements of style, but quiet affirmations of existence, attempts to carve out a unique identity within a system that values the collective above all else. The morning routine, once a frantic strategic game of timing and negotiation, transforms. Now the comforting rhythm of an alarm clock signals the start of your day, immediately followed by the simple, unhindered access to your own bathroom. No longer do you shiver in a cold corridor, clutching your personal toiletry kit, mentally calculating how many minutes you have before Galina or old Mikhail will rap impatiently on the door. The sheer quiet joy of this newfound modest freedom is immense. You can take your time within reason in the warmth of your own small space. It's a small victory, yes, but one that reverberates through your entire day, reducing a significant source of daily stress and reclaiming a small piece of personal autonomy. You can brush your teeth without feeling rushed splash water on your face without a neighbour listening in, and use the toilet without the anxiety of a waiting queue. These simple acts, once fraught with social tension, are now infused with a profound sense of peace. Despite this newfound privacy, the furnishings within your apartment remain consistently standard Soviet issue. Functional, durable, and universally recognizable, you see the same wall units, the same sofas, the same lamps in almost every apartment you visit. This uniformity reflects the centralized production economy, where consumer choice is severely limited rather than individual style or preference. Your apartment, while private, still bears the unmistakable stamp of the state, a subtle reminder of the system's pervasive reach. You learn to live with it, to appreciate the durability, if not the aesthetics, to understand that personal expression in material goods is simply not a priority. And as the years turn into decades, these basic furnishings will become the backdrop for a life that, despite its limitations, will accumulate its own unique history, written not in grand statements, but in the quiet details of everyday existence. As the years settle into the late 1970s and early 1980s, your Moscow apartment, once so stark in its newness, gradually acquires a deeply lived-in quality. It begins to breathe, to tell its own story, through the quiet accumulation of possessions that visually narrate your personal history. The same functional wall unit, once a blank canvas, now proudly displays framed photographs, a sun-drenched memory of a family gathering in the park, a slightly blurred snapshot of a Black Sea vacation, a celebratory moment with friends raising glasses of kvass. These images, often a little faded, add warmth and individuality to the standardized architecture infusing the space, with echoes of laughter, shared experiences and cherished connections. Each photograph is a tiny anchor holding memories against the current of time, a silent chronicle of a life lived within the broader Soviet narrative. The bookshelves, often custom-built from scavenged wood, or acquired after years on a waiting list, expand and groan under the weight of cherished volumes. Here, side by side, you find the revered Russian classics, Pushkin, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, often in worn editions passed down through generations or acquired through meticulous searches in second-hand shops. Beside them stand dense technical tomes related to your profession, their pages filled with diagrams and formulas, a testament to your contribution to the socialist economy. And nestled among these, almost like hidden treasures, are a few treasured foreign works, perhaps a translation of a French novel or an English poet often circulating among friends in a quiet, unofficial lending library. These books showcase an active intellectual life within the domestic sphere, a silent rebellion against the limited official narratives, a yearning for broader horizons that extends beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. The kitchen, though still compact by any Western standards, solidly entrenches its role as the symbolic heart of the home. It's more than just a place to prepare kasha and cabbage soup. It's a vital, intimate sanctuary. Here, over countless cups of strong black tea, often brewed on a well-used electric samovar, uninhibited conversations unfold. Quiet political observations too risky for public spaces are whispered and debated. Personal confessions, burdens too heavy to carry alone, are shared with trusted family and friends. It's a space where the guard can drop, where the public face of conformity can be shed, and genuine human connection can flourish. The air might be thick with the scent of simmering borscht or the sweet aroma of jam, but it's even thicker with unspoken truths and the profound comfort of shared understanding, a stark contrast to the guardedness required in the public sphere. And then there are the small personal touches that truly make the apartment your own tiny acts of self-expression in a world of uniformity. A handmade macrame wall hanging a craft inexplicably popular across the USSR dangles perhaps a little crookedly, its intricate knots a testament to hours of quiet dedication. Potted plants, carefully nurtured and often struggling against Moscow's pervasive pollution, line the windowsill, or adorn the small balcony, bringing a vital connection to nature into the often monotonous urban environment. Perhaps a hand-painted ceramic plate, a souvenir from a rare vacation, adds a splash of colour to an otherwise drab wall. These aren't grand gestures of individuality, but rather subtle affirmations of self, small pockets of personal taste that help to define your unique space, your unique story within the grand overarching narrative of the Soviet Union. As you survey your home, you understand that even within the constraints, life finds a way to flourish, to leave its indelible mark. With the quiet comfort of your own apartment established, albeit with its standardized furnishings and compact dimensions, your focus shifts, as it does for all Soviet citizens, to the fundamental question of sustenance. What fills your stomach day in and day out? For decades, from the 1950s through the 1970s, your diet is a study in predictability and at times stark scarcity. Breakfast, a ritual performed quickly, and often standing up amidst the morning rush, is a predictable affair. Strong black tea so dark it borders on opaque, and a bowl of kasha, most often buckwheat porridge. It's a staple, a cornerstone of the Soviet diet, often sweetened with a precious small spoonful of sugar if you're fortunate enough to have it. The taste is familiar, comforting in its reliability, yet utterly uninspiring in its daily monotony. It's fuel, pure and simple, designed to provide energy for the demanding workday ahead, not a culinary experience to be savoured. Fresh bread, however, is a different matter entirely. It's a rare and cherished pleasure, its availability necessitating an early morning ritual several times a week. This choreography, as you come to think of it, is often undertaken by one parent venturing out before dawn to queue at the bakery. The state keeps its price remarkably affordable, a crucial gesture of social support, but the wait, often long, cold and tedious, is the true price of this simple indulgence. You learn to recognise the particular warmth and comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, a smell that momentarily displaces the chill and dampness of the morning air. Breaking off a piece still warm and slightly crusty is a small, quiet moment of satisfaction, a simple pleasure hard-won through effort and patience. It's a taste that speaks not of luxury, but of successful navigation of the system, a small triumph in the daily battle against scarcity. Then there are the exotic and thrillingly rare treats. Oranges. These bursts of vibrant colour in the monochrome winter landscape are more than just fruit. They're symbols of hope, of faraway places, of a fleeting abundance. Their infrequent appearance, typically from Soviet Georgia, or occasionally from abroad, elevates them to a special status. Often they are hoarded, carefully rationed and saved for significant holidays like New Year's, a time when families gather to celebrate with what little extravagance they can muster. To peel an orange to release its sweet citrusy aroma into the air to savour each juicy segment is an experience imbued with a profound sense of occasion. It underscores a diet overwhelmingly dominated by practical, unvaried staples: potatoes, cabbage root vegetables, bread, making these small, colourful exceptions all the more precious, all the more memorable. Meals eaten in factory cafeterias and school canteens are reliably basic but filling. Cabbage soup, steaming and robust, often serves as the first course, followed by cotlety meat patties, usually made from ground beef or a mixture of meats accompanied by a generous scoop of mashed potatoes. To wash it all down, there's compote, a sweet fruit drink typically made from dried apples or berries. All of this food is heavily subsidised by the state, ensuring that every worker and child receives adequate nutrition. Here food is purely fuel, stripped of any pretense of being an experience to be savoured or celebrated. Its uniformity, its predictable nature reinforces the collective identity of state provision, mirroring the broader emphasis on function over form, on the needs of the many over the desires of the few. It's a diet designed for efficiency, for endurance, for the continuous building of socialism. As the 1970s bled into the 1980s, the challenges of food acquisition escalated, transforming routine shopping into a complex, frustrating quest. Chronic shortages became the defining characteristic of the Soviet consumer experience. A simple trip to buy groceries wasn't a quick run to a single store. It demanded visits to multiple stores, often across different neighbourhoods, each requiring lengthy waits in various lines. You'd stand for what felt like an eternity, shuffling forward inch by agonising inch, only to discover that the very item you desperately needed, perhaps butter or eggs or even a particular cut of meat, was not available. This constant uncertainty meant that meal plans were not fixed but fluid, requiring a perpetual adaptation based on what happened to be available on any given day, rather than what was desired or even needed. You turn meal planning into an advanced daily exercise in culinary existentialism. Crucially, to survive and thrive, you had to master the parallel systems of allocation that quietly underpinned the official economy. Highly sought-after goods were almost never found on open shelves. Instead, they were often secured through workplaces. You might hear whispers that your colleague, perhaps Galina, whose husband works at a foreign trade organisation, has access to East German coffee, a rare luxury. Or perhaps your own parents, if they worked in an organisation deemed important, might occasionally receive a coveted allocation of oranges, a reminder that the system subtly rewarded its loyal participants. Farmers' markets, though officially sanctioned, operated on a different principle, allowing collective farm workers to sell their surplus produce at higher, yet often more reliable prices. Here you might find fresh vegetables, or a piece of cheese not available in state stores but at a cost that required careful budgeting and prioritization. These informal networks were not just conveniences, they were absolutely essential for survival. Food preparation in the home frequently involved improvisation and a remarkable degree of resourcefulness, skills honed out of sheer necessity rather than culinary ambition. You might have a cherished recipe for a cake passed down through generations, but it would inevitably require adaptation to work around the chronic shortages of certain ingredients. No eggs. Perhaps a clever substitute. No fresh fruit. Frozen berries from the summer harvest or a dollop of jam would have to suffice. Every meal was a small act of creative problem-solving, a testament to the Soviet homemaker's ingenuity. You learn to make something delicious, or at least nourishing out of seemingly nothing, a skill that commands quiet respect, and makes you appreciate the simple bounty when it does appear. A typical dinner for guests, though simple by Western standards, represented a significant effort, a culmination of careful planning, strategic acquisition, and resourceful cooking. It might begin with a salad of grated carrots and cabbage seasoned simply, Next, boiled potatoes, perhaps with a sprig of dill if you were lucky enough to grow it on your balcony. Homemade pickles carefully preserved from the previous summer's vegetables would add a tangy counterpoint. And of course, freshly purchased black bread a staple. The centrepiece often a small portion of sausage perhaps acquired through a workplace connection, or after hours of queuing symbolised the evening's specialness. Each dish a testament to effort presented with quiet pride, a celebration of warmth and camaraderie in the face of constant systemic challenges, creating a sense of fleeting abundance. Beyond the daily struggle for sustenance and the nuances of apartment living, the most intimate rituals of personal care were also profoundly shaped by the Soviet reality, particularly in the earlier decades. In the 1950s, Leningrad within the confines of a Kommunalka. The shared bathroom, sometimes serving up to 8 families, imposed strict, almost militaristic, timing is everything rituals. You learned this lesson from childhood too early, and you'd be shivering in the unheated space, your breath fogging in the air, contemplating a frigid splash of water. Too late, and you'd face long queues, a line of weary, impatient neighbours, each with their own morning anxieties and the stressful possibility of tardiness for work or school. It was a daily negotiation, a silent battle for personal space and time played out in the most vulnerable of settings. An unwritten schedule, subtly enforced through glares, sighs, and the occasional sharp word rigidly allocated about 15 minutes per family. This was barely enough for the basic necessities, using the toilet a quick splash of cold water on the face and brushing teeth with a single shared tube of toothpaste that each family provided for themselves. Forget leisurely showers or elaborate grooming routines. Those were luxuries of a different world, a different life. This daily negotiation of shared intimate space was a fundamental, often exasperating lesson, learned from childhood deeply ingrained in the Soviet psyche. You learn to be efficient, to move quickly, to minimize your footprint, and to be acutely aware of the precious minutes ticking by, knowing that an angry neighbour was not a desirable start to the day. Your personal toiletry kits were paramount, meticulously kept separate by each family. These small bags or wooden boxes containing a bar of utilitarian soap, a basic toothbrush, and perhaps a small bottle of eau de cologne for special occasions were carried to the bathroom like precious cargo. The silent, careful act of opening one's room door, trying to avoid waking a neighbour's baby with a creak or a rustle, underscored the constant social pressures and the need for communal harmony. Every movement was conscious, every sound considered. The collective good, or at least the collective peace, dictated your private actions even in the most personal of moments. This awareness became second nature, a deep-seated understanding of your place within the intricate social web of the Kommunalka. The bathroom itself was a stark picture of utilitarian decay. A stained chipped tub with a rudimentary shower attachment, often little more than a hose, connected to the faucet, stood as a monument to past eras. The chain-pull toilet, groaning and creaking with each flush, was a relic. The cracked sink, often with a slow drip, added to the pervasive sense of neglect. Yet for all its imperfections, it served its purpose. The rare presence of truly hot water was considered a genuine good omen for the day, a small, almost superstitious blessing in a world where amenities were often basic and profoundly unreliable. You learned not to expect much and to cherish the small comforts when they did appear, transforming a fleeting warmth into a moment of quiet gratitude, a tiny spark of optimism in the often drab routine of daily life. As the shift from communal to private apartments gathered pace in the 1960s and 1970s, the advent of your own private bathroom in Moscow was nothing short of a profound luxury. It meant waking to the alarm, a quiet personal sound, and having immediate unhindered access to facilities. No more jostling for position in a crowded corridor. No more anxious glances at a watch. No more the silent, exasperated sighs of waiting neighbours. This change, though seemingly small, represented a significant emotional and practical improvement from the previous era's communal cues and rigidly timed routines. The simple act of stepping into your own bathroom, closing the door, and having that moment of uninterrupted privacy was a daily affirmation of personal autonomy, a quiet revolution in the intimate sphere of your life. It eased a persistent undercurrent of stress, allowing for a more peaceful, unhurried start to the day. However, even in your private apartment, the bathroom routine remained basic by Western standards of the 1980s. The idea of a wide array of personal care products of choice and variety was practically non-existent. Your options were severely limited to standardized soap. The utilitarian bar, often harsh on the skin but dependable. Basic toothpaste usually in a metal tube, and a simple, often scented shampoo that served its purpose without offering any particular luxury. The stark absence of consumer variety, no 20 types of shampoo here, you realise, just shampoo, was a constant subtle reminder of the realities of a centrally planned consumer goods industry, where functionality and durability were prioritised over individual preference or the fleeting whims of fashion. This lack of choice extended beyond the bathroom. It permeated almost every aspect of your daily material life, from clothing to household goods. While it could be frustrating, it also fostered a certain resilience and ingenuity. You learned to appreciate the longevity of items to mend and repair rather than replace to value practicality above all else. The idea of choice as a fundamental right was simply not part of your lived experience in the same way it was in the West. You adapted, you made do, and you found quiet satisfaction in the things you could control. The way you arranged your sparse furnishings, the books on your shelf, the conversations at your kitchen table. These became the true arenas for personal expression, far removed from the material world of consumer goods. So while the private bathroom offered immense practical and psychological relief, it didn't usher in an era of consumer indulgence. Instead, it provided a quiet space for personal rituals, a modest sanctuary for the body and mind within a broader context of material limitations. It was a place where you could simply be without the constant social pressures of communal living. This simple freedom, the ability to perform your most personal routines without an audience, was a gift, a profound step forward, even if the products you used remained stubbornly basic. And as you finished your morning ablutions, the next inevitable rhythm of Soviet life would call the demands of daily labour and responsibility, beginning to assert themselves, structuring your entire waking world. Life within the Soviet Union of the 1950s and 1960s was intrinsically structured by the factory horn. This piercing, insistent sound, often a cacophony of overlapping wails from various industrial plants across Leningrad or Moscow, was more than just a signal. It was the relentless pulse of the city marking breaks, signalling shift changes and summoning you to your station. You were a vital cog in the great machine of Soviet industry, part of the vast apparatus of the state economy, constantly focused on meeting quotas and fulfilling abstract plans handed down from above. Your individual identity, your personal desires, were in a very real sense subsumed by the collective imperative to produce, to contribute, to build socialism through relentless labour. Every morning as the horn blared, you felt yourself becoming part of something larger, a vast grinding engine of progress. The factory floor was a visceral assault on the senses, an environment that demanded not just your physical labour, but also a profound adaptation of your sensory perception. The overwhelming cacophony of pounding machines, the rhythmic thud of presses, the high-pitched whine of saws, the clank and grind of gears, created a perpetual din that vibrated through your very bones. Mixed with this industrial symphony were the screeching of metal on metal sparks flying from grinding wheels, and the booming, often gruff shouts of foremen cutting through the din, urging speed, demanding precision. And then there were the smells, the pervasive acrid scent of oil, the metallic tang of hot metal, and the unmistakable heavy aroma of sweat from hundreds of workers all mingling in a thick industrial haze. It was a harsh environment demanding unwavering focus and physical endurance. Despite the crushing monotony of tasks, perhaps operating a lathe to shape tractor components or assembling repetitive parts on a conveyor belt, a subtle yet profound sense of pride often emerged. You'd watch as raw, unyielding metal slowly transformed under your hands, taking on the precise form of a useful part, an essential component for a tractor that would plough a distant field, a machine that would help feed the country. In these moments, the abstract plans and quotas took on a tangible reality. You were not just a worker, you were a direct contributor, a builder, an integral part of the grand Soviet project. This quiet pride, this understanding of your place in the larger scheme of things offered a measure of dignity, a sense of purpose that transcended the daily grind. You might not be a hero, but you were essential. Tardiness, however, was a grave offence far more serious than a mere inconvenience. To be late risked trouble with the shift supervisor, a gruff, often intimidating figure whose scowl could curdle milk. But far worse was the possibility of unwanted attention from the party representative, an individual whose gaze held the implicit power to affect not just your immediate work, but your entire life trajectory. This enforced a culture of strict discipline and constant ideological oversight, reminding you that your punctuality was not just about productivity. It was about loyalty, about adherence to the collective rhythm, about being a disciplined, reliable member of Soviet society. The clock was not just a timekeeper, it was a silent arbiter of your commitment, a constant, subtle pressure in a system that left little room for individual deviation. By 1962, you might find yourself elevated to the position of a section supervisor, a step up the industrial ladder, but one that brought with it a new intricate set of challenges. Your responsibilities now escalated beyond your own output. You were tasked with overseeing approximately 20 workers, a diverse group of individuals with their own strengths, weaknesses, and personal struggles. Your primary directive remained the same: ensuring quotas were met, that the stream of tractor components or whatever your section produced flowed continuously and efficiently. But now you also had the unenviable task of maintaining discipline among your team, navigating material shortages that could cripple production and dealing with the inevitable breakdowns of old creaking machinery. It was a delicate position, indeed a tightrope walk between the relentless, often unrealistic demands of upper management and the often harsh realities faced by the workers on the factory floor, whose lives you now directly influenced. You quickly learned the art of subtle negotiation, of quiet persuasion, of knowing when to push and when to ease off. The gruffness you might have faced as a worker was now your tool, tempered with a necessary understanding of human nature. You had to manage not just machines and materials, but people, their fatigue, their complaints, their occasional acts of petty rebellion. There were days when a crucial shipment of raw materials would be delayed, threatening your quota. You'd have to scramble, calling favours, invoking unofficial channels, sometimes even subtly reallocating resources from another section, with a wink and a nod of course, just to keep your line moving. This wasn't official procedure. It was the everyday improvisation required to make the rigid system function, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of bureaucratic inertia. Then came the machinery breakdowns. The equipment, often decades old and operating long past its intended lifespan, would inevitably fail. A grinding gear, a broken belt, a sputtering motor, each presented a mini-crisis that threatened to halt production and scuttle your quota. You'd have to call in the mechanics, often overworked and under-resourced themselves, and plead for immediate attention, knowing that other supervisors were doing the same. Sometimes you and your workers would have to jury-rig a temporary fix using spare parts from long decommissioned machines, or even fabricating a replacement part yourself if the official supply chain proved too slow. This was the reality of Soviet industry, a constant battle against entropy, a relentless effort to keep the great machine grinding forward despite its inherent inefficiencies and the age of its parts. This supervisory role also placed you more firmly under the gaze of the party. While you weren't a full-time party functionary, your position now demanded a more active role in political education sessions, perhaps leading discussions on technical innovation in service to socialist construction, or relaying the latest party directives. You understood that your success wasn't solely measured by production numbers, it was also measured by your ideological reliability, your ability to inspire your workers, and your unwavering commitment to the party line. It was a subtle yet pervasive form of pressure, a constant reminder that even in the gritty, tangible world of the factory floor, the abstract ideals of communism were never far away, shaping your decisions and influencing your interactions. You were no longer just making tractor parts. You were helping to build a new Soviet man, one quota, one political meeting, one improvised repair at a time. As the Soviet Union progressed into the 1970s and 1980s, particularly in a sprawling metropolis like Moscow, the nature of daily labour, even in an administrative capacity, became increasingly defined by an overwhelming tide of paperwork. The Soviet economy in practice runs on documentation. You found yourself engulfed in an endless stream of forms filed in triplicate detailed reports for various departments and meticulously compiled statistics travelling up the hierarchy. Every decision, every allocation, every perceived achievement had to be documented, justified and accounted for on paper. This created an administrative burden of colossal proportions, a bureaucratic labyrinth where the actual influence of these endless reports on top-level decisions often remained as clear as a Moscow winter fog, yet you kept writing them. You learned to accept this as an inescapable truth of your professional life, a constant low-level hum of inefficiency. You live acutely within the double reality of Soviet life in your workplace. On the one hand, there's the official narrative endlessly repeated in party pronouncements, and state media the story of socialist progress, of over-fulfilled plans of a vibrant and ever-advancing economy. On the other hand, there's your lived experience, the chronic shortages of essential materials, the stifling bureaucracy that choked initiative, and the daily frustrations of a system that often seemed to defy logic. You witness firsthand how corners are routinely cut when materials run short, how quality is often sacrificed for quantity to meet looming quotas, how official figures might be subtly or not so subtly massaged to present a more favourable picture. This duality fosters a quiet, pervasive cynicism, a private knowing that rarely if ever is expressed aloud. To keep things running, you rely on ingenuity and unofficial systems, unofficial reserves, components meticulously hidden away in a dusty cupboard or a forgotten corner of the warehouse labelled perhaps as spare parts for future repair, become your lifeline. These are not part of the official inventory, but they are absolutely essential for emergencies, for bridging the inevitable gaps in supply. The ingenious practice of keeping old decrepit equipment running long past its scheduled replacement through constant repairs and clever improvisation is another common vital adaptation. These aren't just minor workarounds, they reveal a deeply entrenched parallel system that quietly compensates for the rigidities of central planning and the unresponsiveness of official supply channels. You know that without these extra-legal measures, nothing would truly function. Beyond its primary function of production or administration, your workplace serves as a sprawling social institution, a microcosm of Soviet society. It organises everything from housing allocation, that coveted apartment you've been on a waiting list for years, to vacation vouchers for Black Sea resorts, from mandatory political education sessions to cultural activities like factory amateur theatre groups or organised trips to the ballet. The boundaries between your work life and your personal life are constantly blurred, deliberately so. Your workplace is not just where you earn your salary, it's where you find your community, where you access scarce resources, where your social standing is determined, and where your ideological commitment is constantly subtly assessed. It's an all-encompassing entity shaping almost every facet of your existence. The bonus system, a ubiquitous feature of Soviet labour, was designed with the laudable intention of incentivizing productivity, yet in practice, it often distorted it in unforeseen ways. Your basic wages were notoriously low, barely enough to cover essential living expenses. However, bonuses for exceeding quotas, reaching 110% or even 120% of the plan, could significantly boost your pay sometimes by as much as a third or even half. This created a powerful, almost desperate incentive. You witnessed end-of-month production surge as a frantic scramble to push out as many units as possible often, with little regard for quality. And in the quieter, more cynical corners of the factory you heard whispers, or perhaps even participated in the outright falsification of numbers, a subtle but widespread form of systemic deception, where production figures were inflated to ensure those precious bonuses a necessary fiction to keep the wheels turning both literally and figuratively. This constant pressure, this dual reality, permeated your entire professional existence. You learned to read between the lines, to understand the unspoken rules, to navigate the labyrinth of official directives and unofficial workarounds. Your success, and indeed your very livelihood, depended not just on your skills, but on your ability to adapt to this complex, often contradictory system. It fostered a unique kind of practical intelligence, a resilience born of necessity, where you learn to bend the rules without breaking them to fulfill the spirit of the plan while circumventing its most rigid and unworkable aspects. You understood that survival, and perhaps a small measure of comfort, often depended on your ability to play the game even if you privately scoffed at its absurdities. Amidst these professional realities, the next generation, your children, were growing up in a world that, while still Soviet, presented a slightly different landscape, particularly regarding their personal space. You might have a daughter, Natasha, who by the 1960s or 1970s is a 13-year-old growing up in a private apartment. She likely has her own tiny bedroom that doubles as a study, a significant, almost luxurious step up from the communal living of earlier generations. This nascent sense of personal space, however small, afforded her a quiet corner for reflection, for study, for the first stirrings of an individual identity, something you could only dream of in your own childhood. It was a subtle yet profound generational shift, a quiet mark of progress in the everyday experience of Soviet life. Education for Natasha and all Soviet children was explicitly serious business. The state poured substantial investment into a rigorous curriculum focused on mathematics, sciences, and the Russian language, all designed to build a generation of skilled workers, engineers, and scientists for the planned economy. Foreign languages, typically German or English, were taught, but with a distinct emphasis on reading technical literature rather than conversational fluency. The goal was to access scientific knowledge, not to foster international exchange or individual wanderlust. Natasha's school day was structured, demanding and comprehensive, preparing her not just for a profession, but for her role as a disciplined, ideologically sound citizen of the Soviet Union. She was a product of the system, a young mind carefully moulded to contribute to the collective, her individual aspirations subtly guided towards the needs of the state. Natasha, like all children of her age, wore the ubiquitous school uniform. It wasn't just clothing, it was a potent symbol of belonging and participation in the official youth culture. The brown dress, the crisp black apron, and most importantly the bright red pioneer scarf were all part of a standardized ensemble that blurred individual differences and emphasized the collective. Tying the scarf with practiced ease was a daily routine as familiar and automatic as brushing one's teeth, a small ritual, marking her entrance into the structured world of Soviet education. This uniform was more than just dress code. It was a declaration of identity, a visual affirmation of her role as a future builder of communism, a tiny soldier in the army of progress. Pioneer meetings for ages 9 to 14 were a regular fixture of school life, not merely an extracurricular activity, but an integral part of civic education. These gatherings involved patriotic songs, often celebrating the heroic deeds of the Soviet people or the wisdom of Lenin. Discussions focused on Lenin's life and the glorious achievements of the party carefully curated narratives designed to instill unwavering loyalty. Community service projects, perhaps helping elderly neighbours cleaning up a local park or participating in a school fundraiser, were framed as vital contributions to the collective good. Intertroop competitions fostering a spirit of healthy socialist rivalry further reinforced collective behaviour and shared goals. These were all meticulously designed to instill Soviet values to shape young minds and to prepare children for their future roles in a society that valued conformity and collective action above all else. This solemn recitation of the pioneer oath was a particularly powerful collective experience. You remember Natasha standing straight and proud, her voice joining with hundreds of others, affirming a passionate love for the Soviet motherland and an unwavering dedication to Lenin's ideals. This wasn't merely rote memorization. For many it fostered deep bonds and a shared sense of identity among children, a feeling of being part of something grand and meaningful. It was a rite of passage preparing them for communal life, the demands of the Komsomol Communist Union of Youth that would follow, and ultimately for their place in the workforce. The words echoing in the school hall cemented their loyalty, their belonging and their responsibility to the socialist cause, a powerful conditioning for the life that lay ahead. The Soviet school day itself was rigorously structured and intensive, a testament to the state's belief in the power of education. Typically beginning at 8:30 a.m. and continuing until mid-afternoon, it ran 6 days a week, a demanding schedule by any standard. 45-minute periods punctuated by short breaks ensured a relentless pace of learning. The curriculum was meticulously standardized across the entire country, from the smallest village school to the largest urban gymnasium, ensuring uniformity of knowledge and ideological alignment. There were no elective courses in the Western sense, no opportunities for individual deviation. Every child, regardless of location, received the same foundational education, designed to produce a predictable, reliable citizen for the planned economy. This uniformity was a cornerstone of the system, a subtle but pervasive form of control over the minds of the young. In Natasha's classroom, just as in every other classroom across the vast Soviet landscape, subjects like mathematics and sciences emphasized intellectual rigor memorization and precise problem solving. These disciplines were explicitly designed to prepare students for the engineering and technical careers vital to the planned economy careers that would contribute directly to industrial output and scientific advancement. Abstract thought was valued, but always within the practical framework of national needs. You observed how these classes cultivated a particular kind of thinking, logical, analytical and results-oriented, preparing children not just for exams but for a lifetime of contributing to the material development of the socialist state. The goal was to produce capable minds, but minds that understood their place and purpose within the collective. Russian literature was studied extensively, a deep dive into the classics of the past. However, its interpretations were carefully filtered through an ideological lens, presenting authors not just as great writers, but often as critics of the pre-revolutionary order and forerunners of Soviet consciousness. You remember Natasha poring over Pushkin or Tolstoy, but always with an accompanying party-approved commentary, guiding her understanding towards acceptable ideological conclusions. The nuances of human experience were explored, but often framed within the context of class struggle or the march towards a brighter socialist future. It was an education designed to appreciate cultural heritage, but always with a watchful eye, ensuring that even art served the broader ideological objectives of the state. After-school extracurricular activities served multiple, carefully considered purposes. Choir sports clubs, chess clubs, technical circles where students learned about electronics or model building and community service projects weren't just about fostering talent or providing supervised environments. They were also vital tools for further socializing children into Soviet values and collective behavior. These activities were extensions of the school's primary mission to develop well-rounded citizens who understood their role in the collective and were prepared to contribute to society. Natasha, perhaps in the choir or the chess club, was not merely pursuing a hobby. She was participating in another layer of civic education, another opportunity to bond with her peers and reinforce the values of cooperation and shared purpose. Physical education, especially for boys, often included pre-military training reflecting the Soviet system's view of physical development as inseparable from intellectual growth. The ideal Soviet citizen was not just intelligent and ideologically sound, but also physically robust, ready to defend the socialist homeland if called upon. Girls, while not receiving direct military training, were encouraged in sports and physical activity, emphasizing health and stamina. This holistic approach to education ensured that children were prepared to be both productive workers and capable defenders of the state, strong in mind, body and spirit, all aligned with the national interest. The rigorous physical demands complemented the academic intensity, creating a comprehensive system for shaping the next generation. As students progressed through their school years, a subtle but persistent tracking system was in place. Strong performance in mathematics and sciences typically directed them toward higher education in engineering or medicine fields, critical to the planned economy. University admission was competitive, requiring excellent grades and often Komsomol recommendations, but it was entirely free, with stipends provided for students, ensuring access for all, regardless of economic background. However, personal preferences for study were often subordinate to economic requirements, illustrating the state's ultimate control over individual career paths and resource allocation, a gentle but firm hand guiding young people towards professions deemed most necessary for the collective good. The Komsomol, or Communist Union of Youth for ages 14 and above, played an exceptionally significant role in the lives of most Soviet young people. Membership was not merely encouraged, it was practically expected, and failure to join or participate actively could have tangible repercussions. Your Komsomol involvement directly affected university admissions and job placements, creating strong incentives for active participation and demonstrated ideological commitment. For Natasha, joining the Komsomol was another natural progression, a step further into the official structures of Soviet society. It was a space for leadership development, for organised social activities, and for further political education, reinforcing the values instilled during her pioneer years. You understood that this was not just a youth club. It was a powerful gatekeeper to future opportunities, a crucial stepping stone into adult life. Upon graduation, students transitioned into assigned roles, becoming engineers, doctors, teachers, factory workers, or agricultural specialists, each contributing directly to the socialist economy. The future for most stretched before them, predictable in its broad outlines. You knew where you would work, what your role would be, and roughly what your trajectory might look like. There was a certain security in this predictability, a comfort in knowing your place within the grand plan. However, the attainment of private apartments, those coveted symbols of dignity, often still required years on waiting lists. A persistent reminder that even with a secure job, material comforts were not instantaneously granted, but earned through patience and perseverance within the system. The journey from student to settled adult was long and marked by various checkpoints and waiting periods. Beyond these structured daily realities, the specific contours of apartment life, the daily bread, the school routines, the rhythms of factory or office work, the broader economic and environmental conditions of the Soviet Union laid an unyielding foundation for all aspects of life. These macro-level forces permeated every decision, defined every constraint, and subtly yet profoundly shaped the personal struggles and small joys of every individual. You understood that your personal reality was inextricably linked to this larger overarching structure, a constant interplay between the micro and the macro. The availability of food, the warmth of your home, the career path open to your children, all were ultimately dictated by forces far beyond your immediate control, emanating from the distant corridors of central planning and the vast, often harsh landscape of the motherland. Against this backdrop of personal struggles and modest comforts, the Soviet Union operated under a macro-level structure of command and control, where fundamental realities of hierarchy, a planned economy, and an often harsh environment dictated the universal conditions of existence. This was the omnipresent framework, the unshakable bedrock upon which all individual lives were built. You felt its presence in the chill of your apartment, in the scarcity of goods, in the official pronouncements from the radio. It was a system designed for stability and collective purpose, but one that demanded considerable personal adaptation and resilience from its citizens. Understanding this overarching structure is key to truly grasping the lived experience, the subtle pressures and the quiet triumphs that characterize daily life in the Soviet Union. Despite its explicit rhetoric of a classless society, the Soviet system functioned with a distinct, though often unacknowledged, hierarchy. This wasn't a hierarchy of inherited wealth or aristocratic titles, but one based on political power and proximity to the party. You understood this implicitly. It ranged from the apex of political leadership, the party officials in the Kremlin, the ministry personnel dictating economic plans, down through factory directors and section supervisors, all the way to various categories of workers and school children. Everyone had their place, their prescribed role, and a clear understanding of who held authority above them. It was a subtle yet pervasive social stratification, one that defied official narratives but was profoundly felt in the everyday interactions of Soviet life. Upward mobility, while certainly possible, was tightly controlled and highly selective. You might, for instance, rise from a diligent factory worker to a section supervisor, or even for the truly exceptional and politically reliable, be considered for a ministry position. However, such advancement was intrinsically linked to a delicate combination of demonstrated competence in your role and crucially proven political reliability. Active participation in official ideological activities, a spotless Komsomol record or history of unwavering loyalty to the party could often outweigh pure skill. It was a system where your ideological alignment was as important, if not more important, than your professional aptitude, reminding you that every step up the ladder was also a step deeper into the party's embrace. The authority of the party representative in a factory was a vivid illustration of this constant, pervasive ideological oversight. This individual, often less concerned with production numbers and more with morale and political rectitude, was tasked with monitoring worker discipline, identifying any dissent and ensuring adherence to party principles. You knew their presence was a constant reminder that ideological purity was paramount. This oversight extended beyond the workplace into education-shaping curricula and youth organisations, and even subtly into private life defining acceptable behaviour and expression. You learned to be guarded in public to present an image of conformity, understanding that an errant word or a perceived lack of enthusiasm could have consequences far beyond a simple reprimand. Individual actions, even seemingly minor ones like tardiness or a perceived lack of ideological commitment, carried significant weight beyond immediate punishment. They could implicitly affect your career advancement, stalling promotions, or denying opportunities. They could impact your access to better housing, keeping you on a waiting list for years longer. They could even subtly close doors to future opportunities for your children. This underscored a systemic form of social control, a pervasive pressure to conform, and the precariousness of one's standing within the party-controlled system. You understood that every action, every word, every gesture was implicitly weighed, contributing to an invisible dossier that followed you throughout your life, shaping your trajectory in ways both subtle and profound. The fear of trouble, while not always overt, was a constant undercurrent. Even after his death in 1953, Joseph Stalin's immense legacy remained everywhere. It manifested not as a physical presence, but as a persistent, almost atmospheric undercurrent of fear and caution that shaped a deeply centralized, tightly controlled society. You didn't need to see his portrait on every wall. You felt his influence in the way people spoke, or rather didn't speak about sensitive topics. His shadow subtly dictated communication norms and individual caution, despite the easing of the harshest repression in later decades. The memory of the purges of neighbours disappearing overnight, of arbitrary arrests and forced confessions, was etched deeply into the collective psyche, a silent, powerful reminder of the consequences of deviation. It was a lingering cloud, a quiet warning. This lingering influence meant that a certain self-censorship became second nature. You learned to read between the lines of official pronouncements to understand the subtle nuances of political discourse, and to always maintain a public face of conformity. The air of mass terror might have receded, but the mechanisms of control, the expectation of loyalty, and the subtle but pervasive surveillance remained. The stories of those who had suffered, often whispered in the privacy of kitchens, served as a constant, sobering reminder of the power of the state and the fragility of individual freedom. It fostered a deep-seated caution, a reluctance to draw undue attention to oneself, and a quiet acceptance of the system's inherent limitations. Compounding this, the memory of the Great Patriotic War, World War II also profoundly imbued society with a collective resilience and a deep-seated caution. The immense sacrifices, the millions of lives lost, the sheer struggle for survival against an existential threat. These experiences forged a powerful national identity and an unspoken understanding. Adherence to the system, loyalty to the state, was often seen as a means of ensuring survival and stability, a collective pact to prevent such devastation from ever happening again. The war's legacy was invoked constantly in propaganda, in films, in school lessons, solidifying the idea that the strong unified Soviet state was the only guarantor of peace and security. You felt this weight of history, this collective memory of struggle shaping your outlook and reinforcing your role within the larger collective. In this environment where the past cast such a long shadow, adherence to the system was often seen as a pragmatic choice, a path to relative safety, and a measure of predictability. You might privately harbour doubts or frustrations, but publicly you presented a united front. This wasn't necessarily born of genuine ideological fervour for all, but often from a profound understanding of the power dynamics, a pragmatic acceptance of the status quo. The alternative, the path of overt dissent, carried risks too great to contemplate for most ordinary citizens. So you adapted, you conformed, you became part of the enduring structure, navigating its rules, and reaping its meagre rewards, always with the ghosts of the past looking over your shoulder, subtly reminding you of the consequences of straying from the path. At its very core, the Soviet economy was entirely defined by central planning. This wasn't just an economic theory. It was the omnipresent force dictating every aspect of production, distribution, and consumption. Directives flowed down from ministry meetings, often held behind closed doors in Moscow, where rigid plan targets were set for every factory, every farm, every sector of the economy. This top-down approach prioritized quantity-heavy industry and strict adherence to predetermined 5-year plans over market demand or consumer preference. The result was a profound disconnect between what the state produced and what you, the average citizen, actually needed or wanted. You learn to live with this disconnect and navigate a system that often seemed to operate in a reality separate from your own daily struggles. Quotas to meet, plans to fulfill, were not abstract slogans. They were the relentless daily directives that structured industrial life. From the individual factory worker operating a lathe to the senior supervisors overseeing entire sections, everyone was caught in this relentless cycle. Your worth, your success, your bonuses were all tied to these numbers. This constant pressure to meet and exceed targets meant that efficiency and innovation were often sacrificed for sheer volume. Quality might suffer, corners might be cut, but the numbers on the report ascending the hierarchy had to look good. This absolute control exerted by central authorities over economic output created a system that was often rigid, unresponsive, and prone to systemic inefficiencies, yet it was the only system you knew. It was like trying to steer an oil tanker with a teaspoon. A typical division between political authority and practical knowledge was endemic within this structure. You observed it everywhere. The party men, who often held directorships or leadership positions in factories and ministries, were appointed primarily based on political loyalty and ideological adherence, rather than genuine technical expertise or understanding of the production process. Meanwhile, the chief engineers, the foremen, the skilled workers, they were the ones who genuinely understood how things work, who knew the intricacies of the machinery, the challenges of production, the realities on the factory floor. This created a pervasive political overlay on all economic operations where crucial decisions were often made by those with political power, but without practical understanding, leading to frequent frustration and the need for unofficial workarounds. The concepts of reserves and unofficial reserves highlighted the inherent inefficiencies and necessary workarounds demanded by rigid planning and unreliable top-down supply chains. Reserves might refer to the official allowances for contingencies, but more often it referred to the practice of cutting corners, making do with less, or skillfully finding materials within current allocations that were borrowed from other projects. Unofficial reserves were a different beast entirely, components meticulously hidden away in a secret compartment, or a forgotten storeroom acquired through unofficial channels, or simply liberated from another department kept as a lifeline for emergencies. These unofficial hoards were vital improvisations forming a crucial parallel system that compensated for the rigid planning and unresponsive supply channels, enabling factories to continue operating despite official shortcomings. For the average citizen, your daily life was fundamentally characterized by chronic shortages of goods. This wasn't an occasional inconvenience, it was a constant defining feature of the Soviet consumer landscape. Routine shopping was transformed into a complex, time-consuming quest, demanding visits to multiple stores, often enduring long queues for even the most basic items. You learned to adapt your meal plans and household needs based on whatever happened to be available, rather than what you desired or truly needed. The simple act of buying a loaf of bread or a packet of tea became an exercise in strategy and patience, a daily testament to the system's inability to consistently meet consumer demand. You developed a keen eye for what came into the local store, and the word would spread like wildfire, often leading to a mad dash and another queue. Despite these pervasive shortages, heavily subsidized prices for essential goods were a state guarantee. Bread, a staple of life, was incredibly cheap, as was public transport on the Moscow metro, a marvel of engineering. Cultural events like cinema tickets and theatre performances were also kept remarkably affordable. This was a deliberate policy to ensure basic access for all citizens, a core tenet of the socialist promise. However, this guarantee often came at the cost of quality, variety, and most frustratingly consistent availability. You might be able to afford the bread, but you'd have to queue for it. You could attend the ballet for pennies, but you might struggle to find a pair of decent shoes to wear. It fostered a sense of collective limitation, a shared understanding that while basic needs were theoretically met, anything beyond the bare minimum required effort, connections, or sheer luck. In this environment, workplace distribution emerged as a critical parallel system that often compensated for the retail shortcomings. Sought-after foods, a rare sausage, a coveted box of chocolates, were often distributed through your factory or office. The same applied to coveted vacation vouchers for sanatoriums or Black Sea resorts, and even most significantly housing allocations. This system functioned as a powerful non-monetary currency for accessing scarce goods and services subtly reinforcing loyalty to your employer and by extension to the party. You understood that being a good worker, an active Komsomol or party member, could grant you access to privileges unavailable to those who merely relied on the official retail network. It created a powerful incentive for conformity and diligence within the official structures. Actual money in this unique context often mattered less than in capitalist economies. While you needed rubles for daily transactions, they were often useless if there was nothing to buy. Instead, social connections, workplace status, and party membership became crucial forms of capital, demonstrating the unique resource management dynamics and unofficial influence networks that truly made the Soviet system function. A well-placed contact, a favour, owed a quiet word from a party official. These could open doors that money alone could not. You learned the intricate art of blat, the informal system of favours and connections, understanding that your network of relationships was often more valuable than your bank balance. This highlighted the deep systemic inconsistencies and the pervasive informal economy that thrived beneath the surface of official planning. Beyond the complexities of the planned economy and its intricate, often frustrating systems of distribution, the sheer scale and often harsh realities of the Soviet environment itself exerted a profound universal influence on daily life. You felt it most acutely in the long descent into winter in Leningrad, which typically began in October. The pervasive, chilly air seeped into everything, demanding heavy wool clothing, thick scarves and sturdy boots as soon as autumn leaves began to turn. This wasn't merely a change of seasons. It was a fundamental shift in existence, dictating significant physical discomfort and demanding a deep-seated resilience from citizens. You learned to live with the cold, to expect it, to prepare for it, and to endure its relentless grip for months on end. Even in Moscow, the urban environment suffered from the often unaddressed environmental costs of rapid industrialization. You might try to cultivate small balcony plants seeking a touch of green amidst the concrete, only to find them struggling against Moscow's pollution, their leaves coated with a fine layer of soot, their growth stunted. This offered a quiet, subtle indication of a broader environmental degradation, an unacknowledged consequence of prioritizing industrial output over ecological health. The air quality, though rarely discussed openly, was a persistent, subtle challenge, another layer of discomfort in your daily existence, especially if you lived near a factory or a busy thoroughfare. The pervasive cold profoundly affected living conditions, making those early mornings in the Kommunalka, or even in a poorly insulated Khrushchevka, particularly challenging. Inconsistent central heating in older buildings meant that the morning air in your room was visibly cloudy with your breath, and your thin blankets were woefully inadequate against the biting chill. This led to persistent physical discomfort, a constant ache in your bones, a slight shiver that never quite left you, a persistent sense of being slightly unwell. You learned to bundle up indoors, to rely on extra layers, and to embrace the small warmth of a shared cup of tea or a crowded room. The external climate was not just background, it was an active participant in your daily struggle for comfort and survival. While the outline doesn't detail widespread famines from specific natural disasters, the scarcity of basic foodstuffs like oranges and the general monotony of the diet were implicitly linked to the challenges of agricultural production and distribution across a vast country with a frequently harsh climate. Enormous landmass, short growing seasons in many regions, and inefficient collective farm practices meant that consistent abundance was a perpetual challenge. There was a systemic lack of formal relief efforts for chronic issues, with the burden of securing food often falling on individuals and their informal networks. You understood that the land, while bountiful in theory, was often unwilling to yield its bounty easily, and the system struggled to overcome these natural obstacles. The text frequently conjures a consistent drab natural environment through descriptions like cold air, light drizzle, and a sky the colour of wet cement. This pervasive imagery paints a picture of an often unforgiving backdrop to daily existence, a grey canvas against which the human drama of Soviet life unfolded. It's a landscape that mirrors the aesthetic of the concrete buildings and the utilitarian nature of consumer goods, a subtle yet powerful reinforcement of the overall atmosphere. You lived within this subdued palette, your senses attuned to its nuances, understanding that vibrancy and warmth were precious, fleeting commodities, often found more readily in human connection than in the natural world around you. Within this macro-level structure of command and control, and against the backdrop of a challenging environment, the intricate social fabric of Soviet society dictated how individuals related to each other, expressed themselves, and navigated their roles within the demanding collective. This was the inner world of Soviet citizens, a complex tapestry woven from unwritten codes of social etiquette, official cultural narratives, pervasive ideological frameworks, and the vital, almost sacred role of family and informal networks. You learn to navigate this social landscape with an almost instinctual precision, understanding that every public interaction was a performance, and true connection was a rare, cherished gift. Public conversations, you quickly learned, were almost universally muted and practical. In queues on crowded trams or in the workplace, discussions were carefully confined to neutral topics, the shipment of winter boots that might finally arrive next week, or whose child is sick and needs to see the doctor. Anything even remotely sensitive or politically charged was meticulously avoided. On the crowded Moscow metro, a peculiar silence often reigned, a testament to this public guardedness. Few people engaged in casual chatter, preferring instead to immerse themselves in a newspaper or simply stare into the middle distance, lost in their own thoughts. You understood that silence was often the safest form of self-expression in public, a quiet act of self-preservation. Formal greetings, such as "Good morning, comrades," were common in workplaces, a carryover from official party language, even if delivered with a perfunctory tone. These coexisted with more practical, low-muttering apologies like "excuse me" or "pardon" in the highly crowded public transport where physical proximity was unavoidable. This indicated a blend of official formality, a nod to the party line, a necessary pragmatic interaction born of sheer numbers. You developed a precise understanding of when each form of address was appropriate, navigating these linguistic subtle cues with the same practiced ease with which you navigated crowded streets. The inherent tightrope walk of humour and the peril of tone were deftly managed through whispered jokes during work breaks shared only among the most trusted colleagues. These were not loud, boisterous guffaws, but quiet, knowing chuckles, often subtle mockeries of the system that everyone depended on but few fully believed in anymore. These jokes, a vital pressure valve, pointed to the real unstated risks of open critique. To laugh too loudly, to joke too openly, could draw unwelcome attention, and you learned quickly where the lines were drawn. It was a shared understanding and unspoken language of dissent that thrived in the shadows, a testament to the human need for wit, even in the most controlled environments. Many young people you observed developed a dual consciousness, an outward conformity to official expectations that coexisted with private explorations of alternatives. This necessitated an intuitive, almost instinctual sense of where the lines are drawn in conversation to avoid unwelcome attention from teachers, komsomol leaders, or party representatives. They learned to navigate the world with a public mask, while their inner lives might be a swirl of questioning and quiet rebellion. You recognize this dance, this delicate balance between what was said and what was thought, understanding it as a necessary survival mechanism for maintaining both personal integrity and societal peace. Conversely, in deeply private spaces, the kitchen of your apartment or trusted circle of friends, a much greater honesty and authentic exchange were possible. These were the sanctuaries where the public masks could be dropped where genuine human connection could flourish, without the omnipresent fear of surveillance or judgment. Here, over steaming cups of tea and perhaps a meagre shared meal, quiet political observations could be made, tentative questions about the system could be raised, and personal confessions of frustration or hope could unfold. These conversations, while never constituting active opposition, offered more honest assessments of daily realities, providing a vital psychological release and a space for intellectual and emotional integrity. You cherish these moments, understanding their profound importance. Cultural participation in the Soviet Union was a fascinating duality, both a performance of official discipline and a means of quiet personal expression. Pioneer ceremonies and ideological rituals were not just educational tools, they were powerful cultural performances. The red pioneer scarf worn by millions was more than an accessory. It was a potent symbol of belonging to the collective and active participation in the official youth culture. Rituals like flag raising and the solemn recitation of the pioneer oath were powerful collective experiences designed to forge deep bonds through shared affirmation of Soviet ideals. You saw in these young faces a mixture of genuine enthusiasm, ingrained habit, and the understanding that their future depended on their participation. Media consumption was largely a civic duty. Official state media, such as the newspaper Pravda, meaning truth, and the evening news program Vremya, meaning time, broadcast a predictable diet of leadership activities, industrial achievements, and reports on socialist friendship with allied nations. You, like most citizens, consumed these official communications with polite, detached attention, engaging in a form of civic performance without necessarily believing them entirely. You learned to extract the grains of truth, to read between the lines, and to understand that what was not said was often as important as what was. It was a required daily dose, absorbed more out of habit and a need to stay informed, however selectively, than out of genuine interest. Yet despite the pervasive official media, Soviet cinema, though heavily censored, produced works of genuine artistic merit. Films like The White Sun of the Desert, a classic Soviet action comedy, became beloved cultural touchstones. These movies were offered at deliberately low ticket prices, considered a public good, accessible to all, creating shared cultural experiences and fostering a temporary sense of community within the audience. You might queue for hours to see a popular film, enjoying the escapism, the shared laughter, the brief respite from daily realities. High culture, too, was significantly supported by the state classical music ballet, and theatre performances were made accessible to ordinary citizens through subsidised tickets and regular broadcasts. This created a common high-minded cultural language that most citizens understood and participated in, bridging social differences and providing a source of collective pride and shared aesthetic enjoyment. Beneath the veneer of official culture, a vibrant world of unofficial and even subversive cultural expressions thrived in the Soviet Union. Music on ribs, bootleg recordings copied onto discarded X-ray films, often featuring the faint, ghostly image of a human skeleton, provided clandestine access to Western music like the Beatles, Elvis Presley, or jazz. These were not just recordings, they were artifacts of a small act of cultural rebellion, existing in a tolerated grey area, symbols of a different glimpsed reality beyond the Iron Curtain. You might gather with trusted friends in a private apartment, hunched over a crackly record player, listening intently to these forbidden melodies, a quiet defiance that offered a taste of individuality and global connection. The sharing of books was another vital practice, creating essential networks of readership that supplemented the formal distribution system and nurtured private intellectual life. This encompassed officially published works that were simply hard to find due to limited print runs, as well as unofficially circulated foreign novels or the unpublished manuscripts of dissident Soviet authors known as samizdat. You might wait months for a coveted novel to complete its circuit through a network of friends, each person reading it quickly before passing it on. This informal system was a testament to the insatiable hunger for knowledge and alternative perspectives, a quiet act of intellectual self-determination against the strictures of official censorship. Vladimir Vysotsky, with his raspy-voiced songs that subtly pushed against official constraints, occupied a unique and immensely popular position in Soviet culture. His concerts were always sold out, his official records impossible to find, yet his music was widely circulated through unofficial recordings and tape copies. He was a phenomenon, a voice that spoke to the frustrations and hopes of ordinary people in a way that official art could not. His existence created a parallel culture, tolerated as a safety valve by the authorities, offering a channel for collective sentiment without posing an overt political threat. Listening to Vysotsky, you felt a sense of shared understanding, a connection to a deeper, more authentic reality that resonated profoundly. Conversations about literature, perhaps Trifonov's nuanced portrayals of urban life, or the subtle critiques embedded in a new play, and films often shifted effortlessly between aesthetic appreciation and mild critique. These discussions primarily occurred in private settings, reflecting a more nuanced, often skeptical engagement with cultural products than was publicly permissible. You might admire the artistry of a film while privately dissecting its propagandistic elements, or praise a novel's prose while lamenting its ideological limitations. These intimate exchanges revealed a populace that was far from monolithic in its cultural consumption, capable of independent thought and subtle critical analysis even within a system designed to control intellectual discourse. Dominant ideological narratives formed the bedrock of Soviet society. Lenin's towering legacy and the achievements of Lenin and the party were foundational tenets diligently taught in pioneer meetings and endlessly repeated in public discourse. They formed the bedrock of civic education, defining the very essence of the Soviet motherland. You grew up immersed in these narratives, understanding them as the immutable truth, the guiding principles of your collective existence. Even if you harbored private doubts, these narratives were the language of your society, the framework through which all other information was processed and understood. History classes, for example, adhered strictly to Marxist-Leninist principles emphasizing class struggle and the inevitable progress towards socialism. This narrative profoundly shaped students' understanding of societal evolution, presenting a teleological view of history where the Soviet experiment was the culmination of human striving. You were taught that the pre-revolutionary past was a dark age of exploitation, and the Soviet era was a glorious march forward, a beacon for humanity. Your place within this grand narrative was clear: to contribute to this progress, to build the socialist future. Any alternative interpretations, any inconvenient facts were either omitted or recontextualized to fit this overarching ideological framework. Propaganda posters were omnipresent, their vibrant images proclaiming the success of the latest 5-year plan, depicting happy workers exceeding their quotas with an almost socialist fervour. These posters emblazoned on factory walls, public buildings and school corridors promoted an idealized, often unrealistic image of collective achievement. You saw them everywhere, their cheerful, optimistic messages contrasting sharply with the often drab and difficult realities of daily life. You understood them as a constant visual reinforcement of the state's vision, pervasive effort to shape public perception and maintain morale even if you privately scoffed at their overly optimistic portrayals. The cosmonaut program, however, was different. Figures like Yuri Gagarin and other space heroes served as a genuine and powerful source of national pride. Their achievements celebrated, relentlessly promoted the narrative of Soviet scientific prowess and the superiority of the socialist system in developing human potential. When Gagarin orbited the Earth, you felt a surge of genuine excitement and collective pride, a a feeling that transcended ideological skepticism. This was a tangible, undeniable achievement, a moment of true glory that everyone could share, a symbol of Soviet strength and innovation that was difficult to dismiss. It was one of the few areas where official narrative and lived experience genuinely aligned, creating a powerful emotional resonance. The collective experience was paramount, intentionally fostering deep bonds between children in the pioneer organization. They were expected to grow up together, study together, and eventually work together, reinforcing the ideal of a unified, interdependent society. You understood that individual ambition was to be subsumed by the needs of the collective. Education explicitly aimed to instill in children their role in the collective and their responsibility to contribute to society. Non-participation in pioneer activities, for instance, instantly raised serious questions about ideological commitment and loyalty, underscoring the pressure to conform and participate. This collective ethos extended to the symbolic equality of the cafeteria, like the uniformity of dress, powerfully reinforcing the collective nature of Soviet education, emphasizing shared experience and uniformity over individual distinction. The ideal of the new Soviet man and woman building socialism through labor represented the pinnacle of citizenship. These were individuals dedicated entirely to collective welfare, sharply contrasting with individualistic, bourgeois concepts like personal privacy or self-actualization outside the collective. You were expected to strive for this ideal, to devote your energies to the state, to find your purpose within the grand socialist project. It was a powerful, if sometimes unattainable, vision of human perfection, a constant benchmark against which your own life was implicitly measured, shaping your aspirations and your understanding of what it meant to be a good citizen. While official state doctrine was staunchly secular, small personal ways of seeking meaning or comfort persisted, often quietly, almost unconsciously, beneath the surface of daily life. The rare presence of hot water in a communal bath, for example, was considered a good omen for the day. You'd notice a slight shift in the air, a fleeting warmth that seemed to promise a smoother path ahead, hinting at subtle, almost superstitious everyday beliefs that coexisted with official scientific rationalism. These were not grand religious gestures, but small personal interpretations of fortune, tiny acts of imbuing the mundane with a touch of magic, a way to find a glimmer of hope in the often drab routine. Another example, perhaps more widespread, was the tradition of cosmonauts watching the white sun of the desert for good luck before space launches. This beloved film, a blend of adventure and humour, became an informal, almost ritualistic practice, a quiet superstition that endured alongside official scientific rigour and ideological pronouncements. You'd hear whispers of it, a knowing nod among friends, understanding that even the heroes of the Soviet space program, the epitome of scientific rationality, sought a little extra assurance in the face of the unknown. It spoke to the enduring human need for ritual and comfort, even in a society that officially dismissed such things. Marriage, while not explicitly described as a pragmatic alliance, was deeply intertwined with practical considerations for advancement. The search for better housing, career opportunities, or access to vital social networks often implicitly shaped matrimonial choices. While romantic love was certainly present, the foundation of practicality was often undeniable, a recognition that a spouse could be a crucial partner in navigating the system's challenges. The roles of women, depicted as mothers meticulously preparing meals, endlessly mending clothes to extend their lifespan, and participating fully in the full-time workforce, highlighted their distinct and demanding responsibilities within the family unit, often balancing domesticity with public labour. Their resilience was truly remarkable, a constant juggling act of duties and expectations. Family gatherings were indisputably a cornerstone of Soviet leisure, providing essential emotional support and practical assistance in navigating the system's challenges. These often protracted gatherings, frequently around the kitchen table, in the precious private sphere of an apartment, were spaces for rare honesty. Here, away from public scrutiny, the nuclear family provided a crucial private sphere for greater honesty in conversation, allowing for personal matters and carefully expressed political observations that would be risky elsewhere. It was a haven, a place where you could truly be yourself, where shared laughter and quiet comfort offered solace from the pressures of the outside world, reinforcing that the family was the ultimate refuge. Parents engaged in a delicate balancing act when raising children. They desired their children to integrate and succeed in official structures like the pioneers and Komsomol, understanding the necessity of outward conformity for future opportunities. Simultaneously, they strive to instill values that might subtly conflict with official messaging, perhaps explaining that ordinary people everywhere mostly want the same things, regarding global peace subtly countering the official narrative of capitalist aggression. It was a complex dance teaching children how to thrive within the system while preserving a measure of independent thought, a quiet legacy passed down through generations. The father's role in the demanding breadline, often taking turns with neighbours to secure this most basic of necessities, and the mutual aid arrangements with those living nearby, vividly illustrated the daily collective familial efforts to provide for and protect the household within a constantly challenging system. His tireless efforts, coupled with a mother's endless resourcefulness in securing scarce goods and managing the home, showcased the profound unspoken partnership that underpinned Soviet family life. It was a constant battle fought with quiet determination to ensure the family's survival and a modicum of comfort, a testament to the enduring strength of familial bonds in the face of systemic pressures. Individualism as a concept was systematically suppressed throughout Soviet society. This was evident in the uniform nature of schooling, the collective emphasis of the pioneer organization, and the pervasive influence of the Komsomol. All were meticulously designed to integrate individuals into the existing order, to foster a sense of collective identity and purpose, rather than encouraging unique identities or personal self-expression outside the prescribed norms. Your work identity carried significant weight in all aspects of life, blurring the boundaries between professional and personal existence, aiming to foster an all-encompassing collective identity, where your role as a productive member of society defined you more than your individual quirks or aspirations. While the text doesn't explicitly detail the impact of scandal on lineage, the negative attention from a party representative or a supervisor could profoundly affect one's permanent record and future opportunities. Such an official black mark could extend consequences beyond the individual, subtly impacting their children's university admissions or job placements, highlighting a form of generational accountability, an unspoken understanding that a family's standing was intertwined with the behaviour of its members. Crucially, unofficial arrangements, such as fathers taking turns on the breadline, were vital systems of mutual aid that were absolutely crucial for daily survival. These demonstrated how people relied on interpersonal trust and connection in the face of systemic shortcomings. Personal connections, unofficial channels, and creative interpretations of the rules, often referred to as blate, were absolutely essential for things to actually get done in factories, bypassing the slow, unresponsive formal system. You knew that fabricating parts from unofficial reserves or hoarding components was often the only way to meet quotas, a quiet testament to the ingenuity required to make the system function. Information is a valuable currency in the Soviet system. Informal exchanges among trusted colleagues and friends were the primary means by which much of it circulated, filling crucial gaps left by selective facts from official channels and creating an alternative information ecosystem. These whispers, rumours, and carefully shared insights were vital for navigating the daily realities, offering a more complete, albeit often unofficial, picture of the world. Kitchen table discussions, among family, friends or colleagues, represented a vital layer of Soviet social experience, offering spaces for more free speech, the sharing of unsanctioned materials, and the development of perspectives that diverge from official positions without constituting active opposition. These were the true crucibles of public opinion, hidden from the official gaze yet profoundly shaping the inner lives of Soviet citizens. And so, as the echoes of the factory horn fade into the quiet of your modern evening, and the scent of cabbage soup and strong black tea gives way to the familiar aromas of your own home, we gently draw our journey through the daily life of the Soviet Union to a close. You have walked those long, dim corridors of the Kommunalka, felt the biting chill in your bones, and navigated the intricate dance of shared existence. You've savoured a rare orange, understood the quiet triumph of a freshly baked loaf of bread, and felt the weight of a party representative's gaze. The world you've just experienced was one of profound contrasts, grand ideological pronouncements against the mundane struggles for sustenance, collective rhetoric against the fiercely guarded privacy of a kitchen table, and strict controls against the subtle, persistent acts of human ingenuity and quiet resistance. It was a life structured by the unyielding demands of the state, yet also defined by the enduring strength of family, the warmth of trusted friendships, and the quiet dignity found in simply making do. As you now settle deeper into your own comfort, perhaps feeling the soft embrace of your modern bed or the consistent warmth of your heating system, you can reflect on the quiet resilience of those who lived through these decades. Their daily existence was a masterclass in adaptation, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to find joy, connection and meaning, even within the most rigid and challenging of systems. Allow the images of this past world to soften, to blend into the gentle hum of your surroundings. The clatter of pots, the distant cries of babies, the whispered jokes, and the rustle of official paperwork are now mere echoes drifting away like mist. Release the anxieties of queues and shortages, the pressures of quotas, and the subtle dance of conformity. Let your mind become a calm, open space, ready to embrace the peace of the night. Sleep now, and may your dreams be filled with gentle historical whispers, carrying you softly into the realm of rest.